Good evening. I'll call the Plan Commission to order. It's February 26, 2019. Notice has been duly posted. Roll call.
Mayor Joel Chilson,
Present.
Jim Benash,
Here.
Jared Holter,
Here.
Jan Brock excused, Paul Gleason excused, Knut Tempty,
Present.
Craig Brightsprecher,
Present.
Stephen Knott.
Present.
Okay, approval of the minutes of the previous meeting.
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Brightspecker, seconded by Alder Benash to approve the minutes. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? So moved. Public input. Anyone wishing to give public input, please step to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes. Second call. Anyone wishing to give public input? Third and final call. Anyone wishing to give public input? That portion is now closed. Consideration and possible action on the following items. I would, for the sake of not keeping a couple of petitioners here all night, if it is, if there is no objection, I'd like to move items 8 and 9 to items 4 and 5. Yes, Katie.
There has been notice put in the newspaper for the order of those public hearings.
Okay.
So there, I got them as closest to the top as I could.
Okay, then we can't do it. Okay, thank you. This is a public hearing. Okay. Okay, public hearing approximately 7 p.m. Consideration of a conditional use permit request filed by Kathy Edwards of Hands That Care, 616 8th Avenue North, Onalaska, Wisconsin, for the purpose of allowing the operation of a home occupation in-home massage therapy business at the property located at 616 8th Avenue North, Onalaska, Wisconsin, 54650, tax parcel number 18-2350-0. Katie.
In an effort to save Katie's voice, I'm going to read her staff reports tonight. This conditional use permit request pertains to allowing a home occupation in a residential zoning district. Hands That Care is a massage therapy-based business providing relaxation and stress relief services in a calming environment. The applicant intends to utilize one room in the residence and would see clients one at a time. The client will be able to park in the garage or driveway with no on-street parking needed. A conditional use permit is permitted only by approval of the Plan Commission and pursuant to standards set forth in sections 13.811. The city has no basis for denial of the conditional use permit, but has found the basis to impose the following conditions. Number 1, owner-developer shall pay all fees and have all plans reviewed and approved by the city prior to obtaining a building permit. The owner-developer must have all conditions satisfied and improvements installed per approved plans prior to issuance of occupancy permits. The substantial evidence for this condition is that it provides notice to the owner-developer that they are to follow procedure for orderly development in the city of Onalaska in order to promote the health, safety, and welfare of the city. Condition 2, all conditions run with the land and are binding upon the original developer and all heirs, successors, and assigns, so long as the conditional use is being actively used. The substantial evidence for this condition is that it acknowledges and provides public notice of the term and puts the owner-developer and future owners on notice that they are bound by the conditions and that they can continue the use as long as they follow the conditions and actively use the conditional use. Condition number 3 is the owner-developer shall abide by the city's ordinances, Unified Development Code, and Building Code requirements as amended. The substantial evidence for this condition is that it assures the owner-developer understands they must follow the city's UDC and Building Code, which they are required to follow in every way, and that they are receiving the benefit of being allowed to have a use that is not within the standards of the city's zoning code. Failure to follow city ordinances may result in loss of their conditional use permit. The last condition is that the conditional use permit shall be reviewed every 5 years to ensure continued use. The evidence for this condition is that it shifts the burden to the owner of the property to provide proof that the use is active and continuing, ensuring that existing permits are still valid and being properly used, ensures compliance with the city's procedures and ordinances, and promotes interaction and communication with the city, which further orderly development and the health, safety, and welfare of the city. The action requested is that as a public hearing will be held, testimony based on substantial evidence from the public should be listened to and considered before deciding on the requested conditional use permit application. Only where no reasonable conditions could exist to allow the conditional use may conditional use permit be denied.
Thank you. Okay, I'll open the public hearing. Those wishing to speak in favor, please step to the podium. State your name and address.
Hi, my name is Jane Brennigan Reinl. I live at 611 8th Avenue North. I live across from Kathy and Jerry. I've known Kathy going on 10 years. She is thoughtful, intelligent, caring, reputable, honest, kind, neighborly, considerate, and most of all, a good neighbor to all of us. I think everyone knows Kathy and Jerry in the neighborhood. I can't see any reason why anyone in the neighborhood would object to Kathy moving her business into her home. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Stu Bosworth. I live across the street from Kathy, 615 8th Avenue North. And I concur with what my neighbor Jane just said. I think we've lived there since 2013, and Jerry, who's served our country admirably in both the Air Force and the Navy, is deteriorating in health, and so he and Kathy are struggling. And this is a big opportunity for them to continue to use and live and stay in that house in Alaska. And I think that if at all possible, we should support that and support them in their request. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a letter from Colleen Shively, February 25th, 2019, to whom it may concern. I'm taking a few moments to share with you a couple of reasons I fully support Kathy Edwards operating her business in her home. I have known Kathy for the better part of the last 4 years that I have lived at 901 Lake Street. In that period of time, I've come to know Kathy as a good, thoughtful, and considerate neighbor, and now regard her as a friend. She impressed me from the very beginning of our relationship as always conducting herself in a professional manner. I have absolutely no objections to Kathy operating her business out of her home. In fact, I hope for her much success in her transition. Sincerely, Colleen Shively.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor?
I'm Kathy. Thank you. Thank you for listening to people speak on my behalf.
Kathy, could you give us your address, please, just for the record?
Okay, Kathy Edwards, 616 8th Avenue North.
Thank you.
And on Alaska. Thank you. I've been doing this type of treatment and body work for over 40 years. So it's something that I love, because I think you can't continue doing something for over 40 years unless you love it. And for me, moving it into the home, like Stu said, is going to help tremendously with the care of my husband and help me with cost effectiveness. And I did have a question, and I hope I get a copy of what those restrictions were. If I take out carpeting and put in flooring or something, do I need to have another permit?
Nope.
Hooray. Well, I hope you have a favorable view on the type of business that I'm doing. I think it's going to be a plus for everybody. And like was stated, for parking, I can have my clients in the garage, so it's off-street. I also have caregivers that when I'm working, I have comfort keepers come, and they too can park in the driveway, so I can keep everybody, off the street parking when it's necessary. So that's beneficial for the neighborhood. So thank you.
Okay, anyone else wishing to give public, or, excuse me, to speak in support?
Thank you, Your Honor. Diane Wolf, 910 Orchid Place, Alaska. I'm here to speak as a private citizen first. I represent my husband, Dave, and myself. I did receive a notice of this proposal. My husband, Dave, and I wholeheartedly support Kathy Edwards being able to have this business in her home. I have lived there since 1998, and I believe she said there since 2002. And as an elected official, I have always supported invisible home-based businesses, and I think the City of Onalaska has always handled the situation well as long as people are adhering to the ordinances. I think the City of Onalaska should continue to support the invisible home-based businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in support? That portion is now closed. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Second call. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Third and final call. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Hearing that portion is now closed. The public hearing is now closed. At this time, I will make a motion to approve the conditional use permit with the 4 conditions. Thank you.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion made by the chair and seconded by Commissioner Brightspecker. Discussion.
At the Sub-Plan Commission, I had brought up the idea, does a masseuse license need to be given to somebody who operates out of their home? Is there any validity to that?
I spoke with Kathy previously, and she worked with state licensing, and it was determined that she does not need a license to perform this type of work.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
It should also be noted, too, that the business located at 544 Second Avenue North will not be a maintained business, that the business will be run out of her home. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions by the commission? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? So moved. Item 5, public hearing on a conditional use permit request filed by Jared Holter, City Engineer, Director of Public Works of the City of Onalaska, 415 Main Street, Onalaska, Wisconsin, 54650, on behalf of the City of Onalaska, 415 Main Street, Onalaska, Wisconsin, 54650, for the purpose of constructing a 160 by 160-foot by 60-foot addition to the west of the existing structure with a new driveway along the western edge of the property line of the property located at 252 Mason Street, Onalaska, Wisconsin, 54650, tax parcel number 18-5905-0. Katie. Amanda.
All right, as you said, that this request pertains to allowing the construction of a 160 by 60-foot addition to the west of the existing structure. A conditional use permit is permitted with approval by the Plan Commission. The city has no basis for denial of the conditional use permit, but has found a basis to impose the following conditions. 1, that the city shall pay all fees and have all plans reviewed and approved by the city prior to obtaining a building permit. The owner-developer must have all conditions satisfied and improvements installed per approved plans prior to issuance of occupancy permits. The evidence for this is that it provides notice to the owner-developer that they are to follow the procedure for orderly development in the City of Onalaska to promote the health, safety, and welfare of the city. Number 2, all conditions run with the land and are binding upon the original developer and all heirs, successors, and assigns, so long as the conditional use is being actively used. The evidence for that is that it acknowledges and provides public notice of the term and puts the owner-developer and future owners on notice that they are bound by the conditions and that they continue the use as long as they follow the conditions and actively use the conditional use. The owner-developer shall abide by the city's ordinances, Unified Development Code, and building requirements as amended. This third condition assures that the owner-developer understands they must follow the city's Unified Development Code and building code, which they are required to follow in every way, and that they are receiving the benefit of being allowed to have a use that is not within the standards of the city's zoning code. Failure to follow city ordinances may result in loss of their conditional use permit. And fourth, that the conditional use permit shall be reviewed every 5 years to ensure continued use. This shifts the burden of the owner to the property to provide proof that the use is active and continuing. Ensuring that existing permits are still valid and being properly used ensures compliance with the city's procedures and ordinances and promotes interaction and communication with the city, which furthers orderly development in the health, safety, and welfare of the city. At this public hearing, testimony based on substantial evidence from the public should be listened to and considered before deciding on the requested conditional use permit application. Only where no reasonable conditions could exist to allow the conditional use may the conditional use permit be denied.
Thank you. At this time, I will open the public hearing. Those wishing to speak in favor, please step to the podium. Second call, those wishing to speak in favor. Third and final call, those wishing to speak in favor. That portion of the public hearing is closed. Those wishing to speak in opposition. Second call, those wishing to speak in opposition. Third and final call, those wishing to speak in opposition. That portion of the public hearing is now closed. The public hearing is closed. What is the wish of the commission?
Mr. Mayor, after careful consideration, I would recommend that we approve the conditional use permit request filed by Jared Holter, City Engineer, Director of Public Works for the City of Onalaska, on behalf of the City of Onalaska for the purpose of constructing a 160-foot by 60-foot addition to the west of the existing structure with a new driveway along the western edge of the property line of the property located at 252 Mason Street, Onalaska, Wisconsin, 54650, tax parcel 18-5905-0 with the 4 conditions recommended by staff.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Commissioner Brightspecker, seconded by Commissioner Tempty, to approve the conditional use permit filed by the city engineer and director of public works. Discussion. Alder Benash.
It should be noted that this project was approved for the 2019 capital improvements budget. It's also necessary because the building that currently houses some of the vehicles over at the Old City Maintenance Building is going to be removed, and it's going to be necessary to keep vehicles inside. This is a project, as mentioned, that's been approved and worthwhile for the city.
Commissioner Tempty.
I think that condition number 4 is kind of silly. What it's saying is that if they don't build this in 5 years, they have to come in for a review. I don't even see any need for that.
Well, government moves awful slow sometimes.
Yeah, but
Just teasing.
I know, but
Katie?
Another purpose for that condition is if the city were not to construct it within 1 year, the conditional use permit becomes invalid. So the continued use is only if it actually becomes active and then they start to do it. So it's either there or it isn't, which I understand your point.
I think it's 1 year for construction, but it's automatically reviewable based on the actual use that's occurring every 5 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it is duly noted, Commissioner Tempty. Anyone else? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions.
I'll abstain.
One abstention, that being the Public Works Director. Motion carries. Item 6. Public hearing. Consideration of rezoning request filed by Benjamin Phillips of Phillips Outdoor Services, Inc. on behalf of Manuel and Linnea Rivera, 2811 Morning Glory Place, Onalaska, Wisconsin, 54650, to rezone the properties located at 9550 East 16 Frontage Road and State Road 16, Onalaska, Wisconsin, 54650, from R1 Single Family Residential District to TC Transitional Commercial to B2 Community Business for the purpose of moving and operating the Phillips Outdoor Services, Inc. business at 9550 East 16 Frontage Road and State Road 16, Onalaska, Wisconsin, 54650, tax parcels number 18-3607-0 and 18-3567-10. Amanda.
Katie.
Oh, it's Katie.
I just have the long ones.
Thank you, Mayor. Benjamin Phillips of Phillips Outdoor Services Incorporated, doing business as Phillip Fencing Incorporated, has contracted to purchase the properties in question as a new company home location. Currently zoned transitional commercial along the frontage road and single-family residential just north. The intention is to redevelop these properties in question for the following purposes: allow for retail traffic in the existing structure, utilize the existing natural outdoor garden to showcase products and services offered by the business, construct a second principal structure just north of the existing parking lot to store inventory, products, and equipment securely and out of sight, and lastly, enclose the rear of the property with decorative, high-quality fence product to allow for additional parking. The Hughes Trade and Contractors Offices and Supply Store are outright permitted in the B2 district. And the proposed secondary structure will cross existing parcel lines with different zoning districts, therefore rezoning is necessary. City will require that the two noted tax parcels be merged to ensure that buildings do not cross parcel boundaries. That's not allowed in our zoning ordinance. And lastly, a .03 acre parcel included in the sale of the land is located in the town of Madera. In order for the applicant to have full use of the land, annexation of this parcel and merging of the others will be required. As a public hearing will be held at the meeting, testimony should be listened to and considered before deciding on the requested application. City staff have put together 9 conditions of approval. Number 5, which is regarding the annexation requirement, is highlighted for you this evening.
Thank you. I'll entertain this is a public hearing, excuse me. Those wishing to speak in favor, please step to the podium.
Good evening. Benjamin Phillips, Phillips Outdoor Services, 2726 Larson Street. Here,
Ben, could you speak a little into the more?
a little bit louder.
That's better, thanks.
Thank you. Just here with the hope that our business can relocate to the Highway 16 address to better serve our community, to be a little bit more visible and accessible for our customers, and we can expand our retail part of our business as well. We've outgrown our current facility in all aspects, and we look forward to calling Onalaska our home. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor?
Good evening. I'm Dan Stevens at 1708 Jennifer Court in Onalaska. I did not plan on coming to speak here in favor of this, but my office is located in that general vicinity on Highway 16, frontage road. The building in question, I believe, is going to be a hard building to fill, and I'm excited at the prospect of having somebody that can fill that and utilize that space. In the interest of economic development and supporting Onalaska, I would recommend in favor of the proposal.
Any,
I also wasn't planning on speaking on this item, but Diane Wolf, 910 Orchid Place, Onalaska, I can totally concur with Mr. Stevens' comments. It's an area that I personally know very well just from shopping in that area, and I've been kind of wondering what was going to go in there, and I do feel it is a very tough spot to fill, and I couldn't be more excited about the possibility of that, so I certainly thank them for coming forward with this plan and urge you to support this. Thank you.
anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Second call, anyone wishing to speak in favor? Third and final call, anyone wishing to speak in favor? That portion is now closed. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Second call, anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Third and final call, anyone wishing to speak in opposition? That portion of the public hearing is now closed. The public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the commission?
Make a motion to approve the rezoning request filed by Benjamin Phillips of Phillips Outdoor Services with the 9 conditions.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Alder Banash, seconded by Commissioner Brightspecker to approve the conditional use permit, or, excuse me, check that, the rezoning request by Ben Phillips of Phillips Outdoor Services. Discussion. Alder Banash.
As we brought up at the subcommittee, it's recognized that there will not be manufacturing at this site, that it will be displaying customer merchandise, and that there are no residential homes in the immediate area, and also the business will be facing Highway 16.
Okay. Commissioner Brightspecker.
Just wanted to say, Ben, that's a nice problem to have, outgrowing your current facility. We hope everybody outgrows their current facilities. Good for you.
Anyone else? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? So moved. Item 7. Oop, that was item 7.
No.
No, that was item 6.
Oh, that was 6, yeah. Item 7, public hearing, conditional use permit request filed by Benjamin Phillips of Phillips Outdoor Services, Inc., on behalf of Manuel and Linnea Rivera, 2811 Morning Glory Place, Onalaska, Wisconsin, 54650, for the purpose of constructing a second principal structure, 40 feet by 120 feet, and that's a storage building, on a single parcel located at 9550 East 16 Frontage Road and State Road 16, Onalaska, Wisconsin, 54650. Tax parcels number 18-3607-0 and 18-3567-10.
All right.
Amanda.
This conditional use permit request may be permitted only by approval of the Plan Commission and pursuant to standards set forth in Section 13811. The city has no basis for denial of the conditional use permit, but has found a basis to impose the following conditions. So this request coincides with the former request to rezone both parcels, which was just approved. It is conditioned upon the approval of that rezoning of those 2 parcels from transitional commercial and single-family residential districts, respectively, to community business B2 district, as the second principal structure will cross parcel lines and zoning districts. The evidence for this is it requires appropriate zoning in order for the conditional use for 2 principal structures on a single parcel to be allowed. If the rezoning is not approved, the conditional use permit will be null and void, as the proposed use is not allowed in the single-family R1 district, and the proposed structure crossing parcel lines and zoning districts. Condition 2, the owner and developer shall pay all fees and have all plans reviewed and approved by the city prior to obtaining a building permit The owner-developer must have all conditions satisfied and improvements installed per approved plans prior to issuance of occupancy permits. This condition provides notice to the owner-developer that they are to follow procedures for orderly development in the city of Onalaska in order to promote the health, safety, and welfare of the city. The third condition is that all conditions run with the land and are binding upon the original developer and all heirs, successors, and assigns, so long as the conditional use is being actively used. This condition acknowledges and provides public notice of the term and puts the owner-developer and future owners on notice that they are bound by the conditions and that they can continue the use as long as they follow the conditions and actively use the conditional use. The fourth condition is that the owner and developer shall abide by the city's ordinance, Unified Development Code, and the building code requirements as amended. This condition assures that the owner-developer understands they must follow the city's Unified Development Code, the building code, which they are required to follow in every way, and that as they are receiving the benefit of being allowed to have a use that is not within the standards of the city's zoning code. Failure to follow city ordinances may result in loss of their conditional use permit. Condition number 5 is that the conditional use permit shall be reviewed every 5 years to ensure continued use. This condition shifts the burden to the owner of the property to provide proof that the use is active and continuing. Ensuring that existing permits are still valid and being properly used ensures compliance with the city's procedures and ordinances and promotes interaction and communication with the city, which furthers orderly development and the health, safety, and welfare of the city. Action being requested, as a public hearing will be held, testimony based on substantial evidence from the public should only be listened to and considered before deciding on the conditional use permit application. Only where no reasonable conditions could exist to allow the conditional use may a conditional use permit be denied.
Thank you. Okay, I will open the public hearing. Those wishing to speak in favor, please step to the podium. Second call, those wishing to speak in favor. Third and final call, those wishing to speak in favor. That portion is now closed. Those wishing to speak in opposition. Second call, those wishing to speak in opposition. Third and final call, those wishing to speak in opposition. That part of the public hearing is closed. The public hearing is closed. What is the wish of the commission? Commissioner Breitspecker?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I would like to make a motion that we approve the conditional use permit requested by Benjamin Phillips of Phillips Outdoor Services related to the construction of a second principal structure, a storage building on a single parcel located at 9550 East 16 Frontage Road and State Road 16 on Alaska, Wisconsin, tax parcels number 18-3607-0 and 18-3567-10 with the 5 conditions recommended by staff.
Second.
A motion by Commissioner Breitspecker, seconded by Commissioner Knott, to approve conditional use permit filed by Ben Phillips of Phillips Outdoor Services for a second principal structure, 40 feet by 120 feet, on a single parcel located at 9550 East 16 Frontage Road and State Road 16, Onalaska, Wisconsin. Tax parcels 18-3607-0 and 18-3567-10. All in favor? Oh, discussion, excuse me.
Yeah, I have the same thing here. I'm going to beat a dead horse.
Okay.
The conditional permit on both 5 and 7 are for building. There's nothing in the conditional permit about use and things like that. So number 5, again, has to do with continued use. There's nothing in the conditional permit that says anything about the continued use. So technically, there's something wrong with the wording here. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, I will ask counsel.
Well, if the building doesn't exist in 5 years, the conditional use permit would need to be removed.
What was that?
So if they take the building down in the next 5 years, they're no longer using the building, and so the conditional use permit would be revoked.
But the conditional permit doesn't have anything about what the building is being used for. The conditional permit is only talking about building it. So what I'm saying is that technically the statement for the conditional permit is not correct, that it should, if you're talking about building it and using it for a certain purpose, that should be stated in the request, not the way it's requested right now. Right now, it's only talking about building the building.
Commissioner Brightspecker?
I see what you're saying, Skip, but the conditional use isn't for the use. The use, as I understand it, is a permitted use in that area. It is strictly related to the construction of a second principal structure.
Yeah, not the use
But
of
it has
it.
nothing to do about the use.
That's right.
The use
my
is,
point.
the use is permitted. A conditional use can be applied, oh, Katie, go ahead.
Please, Katie.
This is a common conditional use permit, and I believe later on in our printed agenda, we will be discussing ways that we can improve our UDC, and this is a wonderful suggestion that we can bring forward to our consultants to fix in the future.
Well played. Okay. Anyone else? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions. Motion carries. Item 8, review and consideration of a request by Gerald Valley, General Merchandise Manager of Shopko, to host an extended tent sale event in 2019 at 9366 State Road 16, Onalaska, Wisconsin, tax parcel number 18-3589-9. Katie.
Thank you, Mayor. Our section 13-6-14 allows outdoor displays, sales area, and temporary tents limited to 30 days per calendar year unless otherwise approved by the Plan Commission. Temporary tents may be installed for a maximum of 180 days annually. City received a request from Shopko of Onalaska on January 25th to allow for the operation of their seasonal garden center that lasts from April 1st, 2019 through August 31st, typically 2019. They usually have 3 temporary tent structures, 1,860 square feet, 1,025 square feet, and 1,025 square feet, collectively selling hard goods, assorted flowers, vegetables. The 2 smaller structures are condensed and closed completely no later than July 4th, typically due to the season, and the last structure, which houses cash registers, is typically closed no later than August 31st of 2019. Recommended action, approve the request by Shopko to allow an extended tent sale event in 2019, conditioned upon obtaining a tent permit for each tent from the Onalaska Inspection Department.
Okay. What is the wish of the commission?
I would make a motion that we approve the request by Shopko to allow an extended tent sale event in 2019 at 9366 State Road 16, Onalaska, Wisconsin, conditioned upon obtaining a tent permit for each tent from the Onalaska Inspection Department.
Second?
Motion made by Commissioner Brightspecker, seconded by Alder Banash, to approve Shopko to host an extended tent sale event in 2019 at 9366 State Road 16, Onalaska, provided that each tent gets its own permit. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? So moved. Item 9, review and consideration of an annexation application for N5560 Abbey Road and N5538 Abbey Road, .84 acres total, filed by Richard and Judith Volden, 573 Fairway Creek Drive, Onalaska, Wisconsin, 54650, tax parcel numbers 10-2329-1 and 10-2333-0. Katie?
Thank you. These properties are directly adjacent to Abbey Road, which was recently annexed into the city of Onalaska. Applicant is requesting that these parcels, 0.3 acres and 0.54 acres respectively, be annexed into the city to obtain access to city water and sanitary sewer infrastructure. The automatic zoning applied to annexed parcels is single-family residential. They intend to immediately bring this in instead of single-family residential to light industrial. Staff is supportive of this annexation request. We have put together 10 conditions of approval. One of the questions was additional businesses that are in this area. I was not able to directly connect with the applicant. However, we do know that they do ATV and repair. They also have some office at their location. And some small retail, which are all permitted uses in the light industrial district. Also, for the record, there is a cell tower at one of the properties. So if that cell tower should receive new antennas, RRUs, things similar of that nature that you see of other cell towers, they will be required to get a conditional use permit to continue to add new structures to that particular one. So that may be a new cell tower that would be in the city of Onalaska that is not today. And 10 conditions of approval.
Okay. What is the wish of the commission?
I'll make a motion that we recommend approval of the annexation application for the N5560 Abbey Road and N5538 Abbey Road, tax parcels numbers 10-2329-1 and 10-2333-0, filed by Richard and Judith Walden,
With the 10 conditions?
with the 10 conditions as stated.
Mr. Mayor, I would second that.
Okay, motion made by Commissioner Tempty, seconded by Commissioner Brightspecker to approve the annexation application by Richard and Judith Volden for N5560 Abbey Road and N5538 Abbey Road. Tax parcels numbers 10-2329-1 and 10-2333-0 with the 10 conditions.
I just have a question with Jared. I assume that since the staff is recommending approval of this, the Public Works has no problem with water, sewer, or snow removal with this annexation.
Well, snow removal right now everywhere is a problem. No, this project is out for bid right now. We will be receiving bids for the installation of the sanitary sewer, water main, and storm water in this area, and have it done by fall is the goal.
Okay. Any other questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? So moved. Item 10, discussion and feedback on presentations by HKGI on Uniform Development Code Zoning Ordinance Rewrite Project, and B, Community Development Authority Draft Redevelopment Plans for State Road 16 and Downtown Onalaska. Katie.
Thank you. We have Jeff Miller and, oh my God, Rita Trapp from HKGI, who will be doing a presentation for us this evening, starting with the Unified Development Code and Zoning Ordinance Rewrite Project. A copy of it has been included in your packet. They have their voice.
All right.
Anytime you're ready.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Jeff.
Good evening,
Thanks.
Mayor and commissioners and staff. I'm Jeff, that's Rita, just to be clear. We're going to give you an overview of where we're at in the UDC rewrite project. You should have gotten a brief overview of every section of the code and our analysis of it, but we're going to go over the highlights of the key improvement areas and then the proposed outline of what the code would be going forward. So, see if I can make this work. Page down, okay. So we're going to go over three things. They're basically the three components of the report that you received in your packet. We're going to review the major improvement themes, then the outline, and then we're going to present how we're going to break up updating the entire code into 4 different modules. There we go. So as outlined in the, or as listed in the report, the 8 improvement themes that we've identified, and we're open to any discussion or input that you have about those tonight, are to restructure and reformat the UDC, implement the comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2016, evaluate and clarify the structure of all the zoning districts' uses and standards, evaluate conditional uses and how to handle them as a result of Wisconsin Act 67, evaluate the city's current zoning map, improve zoning as a tool for expanding housing development options in Onalaska, address zoning in the State Route 16 corridor, and update and clarify the development procedures in the code. So the first one is restructure and reformat the code. To do that, the current code contains its Title 13. I already forgot that. Title 13. And then below that, there's chapters and sections. So we're going to reorganize those to make them more logical and easy to find things. There's an inconsistent use of what's called parts in the code and articles. Articles don't actually exist in this title. Oh, in Rita's sections that she reviewed. Anyway, they're inconsistent, so it's confusing. Staff has communicated to us how confusing it is to use the code. The numbering system doesn't help people find things in the code or to navigate the code. There's inconsistencies throughout the code. There's a need for cross-references in the code. Another part of it is to illustrate key concepts, processes and standards with tables especially, and then graphics where appropriate. Second one is implementing this 2016 comprehensive plan. And what we mean by that is to revise or create the city's zoning districts that align with the future land use plan districts in that plan. So that will most likely involve creating a couple or a few new zoning districts and possibly getting rid of some zoning districts. And then after that, updating the zoning map with those districts. And as you saw in our update in December, we had already done a lot of mapping to look at how the districts are being applied today and where some are not even being used and some are being minimally used and some are being overused. That being probably the manufacturing M1 district. So the zoning map changes could be substantial as part of this project. Another part of the comp plan was to support revitalization of downtown and the waterfront. And so the code changes, as those are being looked at, we want to keep that in mind. Also enhancing transportation corridors is a goal in the comp plan that the code could implement. Managing growth to preserve community character is another one, and then promoting quality urban design. We'll be evaluating and clarifying the structure of the zoning districts. That includes the purpose of each zoning district, the uses allowed in each one, and then their standards. So is that what's down here? Yes. So as part of doing that, we noticed that there's not purpose statements for a lot of the districts today, so it's not clear what they should be used for, and over time, obviously, that changes. But this is an opportunity to clarify what the purpose is of each district and how to use them better, and identify districts that maybe aren't needed, and then districts that are, new ones that are needed. We'll revise how the districts are structured and organized in the code. And we'll do that primarily by creating a table or tables, and we showed those to you the last time around, so I won't go into detail on that, but there most likely will be a principal uses table, an accessory uses table, and then as far as standards, uses are today's uses are either permitted or conditional, and I guess prohibited would be the third one. Going forward, we think the format would be there'd be uses that are permitted, and it's pretty clear. There's not a lot of there's no standards connected to them really, other than like setbacks and yes.
So you're talking something that would likely be a column type format per zoning district?
Yes.
As far as what permitted uses?
Yes.
versus-
Each district would be a column. Yep, and all the uses are rows.
Okay.
But you can look at all the districts at one time and see where, say, townhouses are permitted across all the districts. And then you can look down a specific district and see everything that's,
It's going to be use driven as much.
it's going to be use driven.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, yep. But something that we believe we'll be moving towards is, because of Wisconsin Act 67, conditional uses are going to have to be treated differently. We think the move, or the direction we're going is to have permitted uses with specific standards, so that it's very clear that this use, while it's not just directly permitted, but it is permitted as long as you meet these standards. So, but they're clear, and they're, the Wisconsin Act 67 talks about them being measurable. So those standards, we'll be reviewing the standards that are out there today related to conditional uses, and then just also identifying standards that, working with you all, you think are needed for specific uses.
If I'm hearing what you're saying correctly, this could maybe minimize the need for some conditional use hearings
Yes,
if the codes are properly constructed.
that's the intent, yeah.
Okay.
Greg, if you look at page 8 of the handout, there's a sample of that table.
And you might recall, I think we handed this out the last time, but in December. You received this in your packet, yeah, in December. So it will look like this. It won't be this big because it's going to fit into your code. So what I'm showing here, and what this is also in the report that we sent out to you. So we looked at all the districts. What we think, how we think the districts could be organized is there's base zoning districts, which you have today, and then you have special districts. And we're proposing that there be base zoning districts, overlay districts, and natural resource protection districts. So you can see the list of them here and on the next couple pages. So these are the design, I guess we call these design overlay districts because they're really talking about how things are designed more so than anything. In addition to what the base district is for that property. And then the last category is natural resource protection. So that would be floodplain, bluff protection, and the groundwater districts, which you have today. So we're not creating those. And then what these other two columns that we're showing here are just showing that which districts today have uses identified. And so if you go down here, you see that there's some of these what are called special districts today, like the Conservation Cluster Development Overlay doesn't actually list any uses. So we need to clarify if that's an overlay, or is it really related to subdivision, or, well, it's not being used today, so that's another question we need to wrestle with as part of our review. But, so this shows how uses are listed in the code, and then also the purpose statement. So, you know, some of the special districts or design overlay districts do have purpose statements. I think that's probably because they're newer districts, and they're just much more expansive. But if you go up to the base districts, most of those do not have purpose statements. So that would be very helpful to identify those. The next major theme is to evaluate conditional uses and how to handle them going forward. So today, CUPs are used to allow uses that may have impacts on surrounding properties. You know all this, but conditions are used to minimize impacts, such as setback, height, access, traffic movement, landscaping, et cetera. And conditions are added through the Plan Commission meetings and neighborhood input. Required for the future, and the city attorney can correct us at any time on this, but is that they must be conditional uses must be granted if applicant meets or agrees to meet all of the conditions. And conditions must be based on substantial evidence defined as facts or information that is measurable. So that's what we're trying to do. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, just I think to Mr. Tumty's point earlier, you know, as a result of Act 67 and the conditions, and the way that it's imposed on us, how we have to review all of this, put it on the record, et cetera, that, you know, it's time to maybe look at some of these conditions, especially like the one we talked about tonight where it's 2 principal uses on 1 parcel. You know, is this something we really should be having a conditional use permit for, or should this be just permitted in certain districts? And so we have a lot of conditions, I think we've mentioned before, that, you know, we don't allow them in any zoning district, and, you know, looking forward, it doesn't make sense as to why we don't allow them at least somewhere. And so really going through, determining where things should be appropriately zoned, and then what if any conditions, or what if any uses should have conditions on top of just being permitted. So we would move to more of a permitted with conditions in the zoning code.
The next one, number 5, is to evaluate the city's zoning map. Key findings so far is that several zoning districts are minimally used or not used at all. Much of the city's commercial land is zoned for manufacturing, or M1. Some industrial land is zoned as non-industrial, meaning land guided in the city's plan is zoned for non-industrial. Some land guided in your plan for residential is zoned non-residential currently. Current manufactured mobile home parks are not zoned for the mobile home park zoning district, and that's actually only applied to three smaller parcels. So that's definitely an area we want to look at as part of this process. Planned institutional land is located in a variety of zoning districts. And it's been mentioned that maybe there should be actually 2 public zoning districts in the future. Land planned for parks and open space or environmental corridors is sometimes zoned for development, so that's not appropriate. And then the city's interested in creating a shoreland overlay district as part of this process. Number 6 is improved zoning as a tool for expanding housing development options. Key findings are that the comp plan guides residential areas for a mix of housing options. The primary residential land use category in your plan is mixed density residential. Also consider broadening somewhat the housing types allowed in the R1 and or R2 districts to allow a greater mix of housing, or alternatively, a new R district could be created that allows medium density or targets medium density residential, but doesn't allow high density. So today it's either R1 is single family, R2 is 1 and 2 family, I think, and then multifamily. There's nothing in between. And if you're interested, there's a whole initiative out there called Missing Middle Housing that you can just even Google. And it's really interesting to look at housing types that are considered medium density that can fit the scale of single family or, you know, two-family housing, so that there's more housing types available in neighborhoods. Number 7 is address zoning in the State Route 16 corridor. Some of the key findings so far are recommended updates to the zoning map for these areas will hopefully be driven from the 2019 redevelopment study plans that we're finalizing in March. And we're going to cover that right after this presentation. How to address replacement of the planned commercial industrial development overlay district, which is applied to a lot of the State Route 16 corridor, but this overlay district has already been removed from the UDC, so it's not an overlay anymore. So over time, it would be beneficial to replace that if possible. The potential need for a new mixed-use zoning district for the State Route 16 corridor, which would be driven by the redevelopment study plan that we'll talk about. Reduction of the minimum and other potential adjustments to parking space requirements. Today, it is, I'm the expert on this, right, Katie? Is that right? 6.7 or something like that? Spaces per...
For our big box retail.
Yeah, for big box retail. So that's a really high parking requirement. So there's probably space out in the State Route 16 area for infill development. And then design guidelines. For this area, they're more important for the downtown area, but they could also apply to this area. And then lastly is update and clarify the development procedures in the UDC. And by that we mean consolidate where we can or streamline them. Consistent organization of them by type. Again, create a table that summarizes application procedures like the one that's shown on this slide. So they would all be on 1 or 2 pages, basically. Application requirements, some of them can be removed to a separate manual that don't need to be in the code at all, and that could be things like fees or forms or how many copies of things, just detailed stuff that you don't need to have in your code. So it's easy to update those without having to amend the code and have a public hearing and that sort of thing. And then lastly is the removal of operational procedures or responsibilities for boards and commissions. So those things, a lot of those things are actually in Title II of the code. You know, what is the role of the Plan Commission versus the CDA versus the Historic Preservation Commission. Some of that stuff's still in this code and could be in Title II. So with that, I think we want to see if there's any discussion or questions or feedback on that portion of the report.
Oh, yeah, just make it a conversation.
You know, one of the things that you just talked about that struck me, I mean, and I realize all this is preliminary, so we're just thinking out loud here. When we talk about perhaps a medium-range residential district that really isn't addressed today, wouldn't that better be addressed by maybe reducing the zoning classifications for residential and allowing more uses within those?
Yeah. So one of the options is to just allow more uses in R1 and or R2.
Because I've always believed, and maybe this is outdated, I don't know, but mixed density housing I've always thought was a good thing in that it tends to eliminate blighted areas or minimize those areas. Is that still a current thought process, or?
Yeah, I mean, we have worked with cities that are expanding the uses within their, you know, in the past might have just been single family or just single family and duplexes. And that's a way to do it too.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be a new district.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that as you were going here.
One comment tied to that as well is that the cities had the R1 district and the R2 district for for a very long time. So most people tend to know exactly what are permitted uses within that district. One, you can do Twindo, you can do a duplex, but you can't do it in R1. So that would be one of the arguments to create a third district, such as they mentioned in R3, which would allow some increased density. Another one of the things that it would make sense is if you had a minimum square footage for a particular lot, you can, as you had mentioned, remove blighted areas, which is also promoting redevelopment, which is something we want to happen in this code. It's really hard to go, if you have a bunch of properties that are all zoned R2, to put R4 right next to them, because the intent is that you're increasing it so much density, and even though it's on a case-by-case basis, people hear R4, the first thing they think of is an apartment building. So by creating where we have a natural gap right now of R3, it might make more sense that a person isn't taking a jump from a Twindo to a 16 unit, maybe it's a Twindo next to a fourplex.
I think defining perhaps in this community our residential usages and zones may be the biggest challenge we have, because like Skip has alluded to so many times, there are some really abnormally small, properties, and nobody wants to hold a gun to anybody's head, but by the same token, we want to leave the door open for redevelopment of that.
Other thoughts, feedback, questions?
I do. I'm kind of taking the opposite approach. I think residential, take for example this apartment complex that was built just to the north of the middle school with all those single-family residentials just to the west of it. There was quite a problem with that, with the residents in that area went out and got a petition to try to stop this from being built. Part of that building was reduced, but I think it can show some of the complexities that can happen when you start mixing large, complex buildings in residential areas. And I think for somebody who has a single family, I would be somewhat remiss or upset if all of a sudden I find I'm going to be facing a fourplex or a 10-plex apartment or something larger when I moved into a single-family area. So I do think we have to be careful about what we do with these zonings so we don't end up with large complexes next to single-family homes.
I don't agree. When I lived in Norfolk, I lived in a single-family area, and right over the fence behind me was an apartment complex, and there was no problem with that at all. I live in sight of apartments where I do now. Most of the houses, all the houses around me, except for the fisherman residence, is all single-family. But the apartment buildings are in sight, and I find no problem with that. I think that the people who come in and I hear complaints about, well, we were promised it would all be single families, and this is going to be terrible. I think they don't know what they're talking about. I think that the multi that we're talking about, like the apartment you alluded to, he wanted to put in a certain thing, and it would have been a very high quality with underground parking, everything else, and people complained about it, so it was turned down. And what was put in was allowed by the law, which was less than what he would have done. So the area ended up with something less by the complaints of the people coming in and by the politicians listening to them, which they should, that sort of thing. They ended up with something less than they would have had otherwise. They are worse off today because of their complaints. So I disagree. I think mixed property with big buildings next to single-family homes and things like that, there's nothing wrong with that as long as things are done right. And what you do right and what you do wrong, that I can't control.
I mean, that's a real tough area because we hear both sides of this here on the Plan Commission, and I understand what you're saying, Jim, but when I moved here, I think one of the things that really I made sense out of pretty quickly was the use of mixed density type attitudes toward residential development, and which kind of mitigated the perpetuation of blighted areas. We don't see a lot of those same types of areas that, granted, you know, our neighbor to the south is a bigger community, but there are some really seriously blighted areas there. And there are lots of reasons for that, but I think mixed density kind of offsets some of that. But I do see what you're saying. I'm not sure I'd want a 7-story apartment complex built next to me, but I don't, by the same token, I don't know that I wouldn't, you know? It kind of depends on a lot of things. It's definitely a double-edged sword, you know?
We'll definitely get into those conversations, and that's probably one of those, those are going to be uses that we're going to talk about standards, you know, whether they're in the same district or different districts, so.
How far can we go with standards without I mean, I see communities that tell you what color brick you have to use. And, you know, I think that's ridiculous. I think to have general guidelines is one thing, but I've seen too many communities abuse that privilege.
Yeah, we'll bring examples, but usually it doesn't get to that detail. It's usually more about scale, placement of the buildings, you know, the physical, so not the aesthetic of it. Any other thoughts on this? We can come back if there's others, but otherwise we could move on to the outline, unless there's other comments.
Sorry. So I'll be focused on the outline, but I was asking Jeff, we're not intending to go, obviously, section by section through the report, kind of skipping over the middle part of that. Are there any questions about the structure of that, or things that you thought we missed, or concerns about? I'm sure you all read it cover to cover.
It was simple.
In detail. I know Amanda probably did, and I'm looking forward to her red lines.
But it was simple to look through. And if it's simple to look through,
Right.
I would follow that it would be easy to, you know, I didn't get a chance to study every different aspect of it.
Yeah, no,
But just looking through it, I'm going, boy, this is easy, you know?
Good. I mean, the intention, this is partly, it's for you, it's for Amanda, Katie, Jeff, and I, in particular, as we go section by section, and this process really helps solidify what's happening for us. But I just wanted to ask, because we're skipping over that middle section and diving into the next part.
Well, and maybe down the road when we start recommending where we're going, you can come back to this and say, well, I thought the intent was to do this for that section, so at least we try to stick to that.
All right, starting, if you have your report, our page 38, which is probably not your page number, she pages everything, but in our report we had page numbers, is the annotated outline. As is shown on this slide, we have proposing 7 chapters. And the 7 chapters are organized in a couple of ways. Some of the ways that we think about it when we organize chapters is to think about what do people use more frequently. So not so much about making it easy for staff who are going to know this code backwards and forwards, but if there's a member of the public and they need to know information, what information do people generally need to know first? And so that's kind of how we pick through the order that it goes into. So we'll start with introductory provisions that kind of set the ground rules for why we have a code, and then I'll dive into the sections. Then we talk about the zoning districts, general development standards, subdivision standards, administration and procedures, signage, and then definitions. So I'm going to dive in. So in chapter 1, the introductory provisions is just going to cover authority, interpretation, nonconformities. And I should say this is our propose, this is what we're thinking. As we dive into it, things may change. Things may get further subdivided, things may get moved around a little bit. But this at least gives all of us a sense of where we're headed. In the end, it may look slightly different than this, as that's been our experience. But these are our initial thoughts. Chapter 2, zoning districts, will probably be one of the biggest sections or chapters. I should say we have proposed a organization of title, chapters, divisions, and sections. So we've gotten rid of your parts and articles intentionally, just because then it's less confusing if we use a different term. And we will propose, as is at the top of this page in your packet, a numbering system that allows us to actually see, if you know how the numbering system works, you'd be able to see whether you're in a certain division of the code. Right now, the way your parts and articles work, and actually the articles are in chapter 8, and they just kind of randomly show up, and they don't really refer to anything. Your parts, you can't actually tell where you are within a part within a chapter. There's nothing that says we're in a part. So the divisions are intended to be numbered in a way that you can tell that you're in Division 1 versus 2. So Chapter 2 zoning districts, the general kind of introductory provisions, and then as Jeff alluded to, we would recommend looking at base district, design overlay districts, natural resource protection overlay districts, and then we go into the use-specific standards. And so this includes, like in the base districts, would include purpose statements, principal use table, accessory use table, the lot dimension table, the site. So everything you need to know about what you do within a zoning district would be located within Chapter 2, Division 2. And then we would go into design overlay districts or the natural resource protection. Each district would be subdivided so you can get to that particular district. Use-specific standards would be used for when we have standards that we would like, those permitted with standard ideas. This is where the standards would be located, and they're organized by, in the similar order that the use table is, so residential ones first, and then they're alphabetical, so you can actually work through and find what you're looking for relatively quickly. So that would be in Chapter 2. In Chapter 3, what we call general development standards, we have performance standards, which is things like the noise and the emissions and the odors that you currently have today in Chapter 4, which is all of a page and a half. So that would be Division 1. Division 2 would focus on parking and circulation. That currently is in your chapter, in your 7 mobility standards. So that comes out and goes where all the other kinds of standards that we use to develop a site are located. Creating some more landscaping requirements and putting them all together, all 3 together, maybe broadening it a little bit more. And then Division 4, fences and hedges. And we may find other things that belong in this as we move forward. Then we move to Chapter 4, subdivision standards. So basic subdivision requirements, things like, what you need to do in terms of improvements. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Subdivision design standards has streets, lots, blocks, required improvements, and dedications. So generally, Division 1s are going to be fairly small, and then Divisions 2 and on will be more detailed. So that would be subdivision design standards. Administration and procedures. So right now, your administration procedures are in Chapter 8. So you've already kind of grouped them together, although there is trickling in other places, some administration and procedures, so again, bringing them in, but then organizing them in a way where site-related standards are together. So your variances, your CRPs, the things that an individual property owner might need or encounter comes first. Then after that, do subdivision-related, so minor subdivisions or certificates of survey, preliminary plats, final plats, those types of elements come next. Then that would be followed by ordinance or plan amendment-related items. And so rezoning, text amendments. We recommend they get handled separately because generally with rezonings, you have a map and notices that have to go out related to a map versus a text amendment is generally general, so you don't need all of that detailed information. And then you have 2 impact studies, which are actually located, if I remember correctly, in Chapter 7, mobility standards, which is fine because it is, but we're getting rid of mobility standards. It probably, because these occur as development happens, it makes more sense for them to go in Division 5. So that requirement relates to traffic and air quality as of right now. Chapter 6, signage. A lot has been done with your signage code. I think Katie said 1.5 years it's been. So we're probably looking at mostly reformatting and then making whatever changes have been found to be needed as a result of implementing it for 1.5 years. I wouldn't anticipate we're doing a major overhaul of that one. And then Chapter 7, definitions. So currently your definitions, I haven't counted, is it like 15 places throughout your code you have definitions? So kind of like to gather them all in the same spot, maybe alphabetize them, reduce redundancies, make adjustments when the same word has 2 different definitions. That'll all happen in Chapter 7. Any questions or concerns, or feel like something doesn't make sense to you?
Is it, I mean, I've always had the position, or taken the position, that I'm not a big fan of text amendments. They always seem to be, in most applications, reactive rather than thought through and take proactive steps to remedy whatever caused the need for the text amendment to begin with. But I know you have to make allowance for those. I mean, I understand that, but boy, I'm not a big fan of text amendments.
But, yes, but you're right. We have to figure out, we have to make sure that we all know what the procedure is for it. So, and right now, it's there. It's just, as I said, my biggest thing as I was going through Chapter 8 was not every type of procedure is organized in the same way. Sometimes there's things about the body that's approving it. Sometimes it talks about notices. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, so it'd be easier for all of us if it was kind of, as much as we could, standardized. Like, here's who needs to apply. Here's kind of the notice requirements. Here's the actual procedure. It's going to Plan Commission. It's going to come, whatever. And clarifying and trying to do it similarly. So, any other questions or concerns, or does this make sense as an approach?
Good steps.
One of the things that may change this a little that we still, I think, are working through a bit is right now we have taken the position, probably rightfully so, that anytime we amend anything in the UDC, it requires a public hearing because we consider the entire UDC our zoning ordinance. And so I think we'd like to get away from that because when you look at these chapters, you know, you're really Chapter 2, your zoning districts, is actually arguably more your core zoning ordinance. Some of these are more just, they more appropriately fit by zoning ordinance as opposed to actually really being considered a zoning ordinance, but because of the way the statute's written and there's no real statutory, even case law driven zoning ordinance definition, it's hard to determine when you need a public hearing and not. And so I think we're gonna look at a way to structure that so that perhaps when we amend our sign code, we don't have to have a public hearing to make a small amendment, if that makes sense.
Any other? You were gonna talk.
I would like to say that, hearing from some developers, they'd like to take the complex and move it to the ease of use. And the direction you're going certainly does that. And that's what I think was someone who's thinking of developing something or wants to pick up something and say, oh, how does this look? And they can, right here in front of them. And I think it works well.
I think we've
Yeah, I
heard
mean, we
that a
definitely
number
heard
of
that.
times, Jim, and I think you're exactly right. I think this really moves that direction where they can almost do their own assessment, you know?
It should make it easier for them, yep. One quick thing, and this is in the appendix to the report that you have, but this one map I'll just explain. And if you looked in the first page of that appendix, it says, what's zoning and future land use review, but it says future land use commercial. That means on the future land use map in your comp plan where it shows commercial, this map is showing the zoning for those and where it's inconsistent. So on this slide, anything that's outlined is not zoned consistent with your plan. So this one's the easiest to see because it shows basically all of the, or most of the State Route 16 corridor is guided in the plan to be commercial and it's all zoned M1. So, so each of these pages at the top says what's the future land use designation from the comp plan, and then what's the zoning, and then it identifies the inconsistencies. So this will be a good way to really update your zoning map in a really comprehensive way.
I had to laugh. We almost have no commercial zoning districts, but yet we've got a ton of commercial.
Right.
I'm going, I was just talking to the mayor, how'd that happen?
Yep. Yep. So that's one of the key things we'll address.
One more comment I wanted to make, because I didn't put it on the slide. Another recommendation for the update is to take out all of the application material requirements. For example, when you submit a preliminary plat, you have to submit, I don't remember what your number is, 30 copies. Oh, I did remember right. 30 copies, and that preliminary plat needs to have a north arrow and a scale and all those things. The recommendation is to pull that out of the UDC. One, because it doesn't always reflect modern standards. We have electronic submittal these days, so you may not need as many copies, and it's easier to change and have it updated if it's not in the UDC. It also isn't really something that's much of a standard. It's just, here's what you need to submit to us. So that will pull out a lot of sections out of Chapter 8, but that's something we're calling the application manual, and that'll be worked on simultaneously, but that's not reflected in the slide. It is referenced in your packet, but I wanted to make sure you knew that that was going to happen as well. So one of the aspects, once we completed the report and looked at the proposed outline, we identified how we think we're going to go through the update to the UDC. So our recommendation is a series of 4 modules. Each module will tackle different elements, and so I'm going to walk through what we're thinking about tackling. We like to craft it after we go through the analysis and the outline, because every community is different. Certain communities, you need to focus on different elements versus others. For you, it feels very important that we start really focusing on the districts. Looking at, as you can see, the first module will be Chapters 2, which is the zoning district, and Chapter 7, which is the definitions. So looking at the district purpose statements, looking at the zoning map, figuring out the uses and whether the right uses are permitted with standard in the right districts. Looking at the conditional use permit criteria. Currently, there's criteria, which we may or may not even need or want to keep, but there are actually 2 sections of criteria that are very similar to each other. And so looking at that and understanding how that works with conditional use permits and whether that's something we want to keep. We will discuss or propose potential new zoning districts, so have a discussion like was started today about, do we look at an R3 or do we look at something else? So that would be the first module, Chapters 2 and 7. Because of the complexity and just the depth of the information we need to cover, the second module will also cover Chapter 2, but it'll be a follow-up. So after our discussion and really pointed discussion that we have in the first one, we go back and draft and make recommendations based on that discussion. So we anticipate Chapter 2 would be actually looking at zoning maps and looking at different scenarios of how we think the districts would be applied, looking at potential specific use standards. So if we have a discussion and we discuss and determine that certain uses are no longer needing to be conditional uses, but we'd still want some standards, we'd know what those are. Which of those uses do we need to go back and research and see what best practices there are related to standards for those uses? We'd come back with, here are some options, here's what we're thinking, what do you think? So that's what the second module would be about. At that time, we would bring a revised lot and site dimension table. So we already have your existing lot and site dimension table as it is today, but once we have new zoning districts and we better understand what we're intending to do in those districts, we probably will need to come up with new or revised lot and site dimensions. So if we allow uses that currently aren't allowed in certain districts, we may need to revise those. And then any regulations for new zoning districts. So if we create a new zoning district, that's when we would start to talk about what would be in those districts. So those are the first 2 modules.
Rita, I think at one point we had talked about the possibility of approaching, see about maybe voluntary rezoning depending on what we came up with. Maybe I'm imagining that. At what stage would we do that?
Where we would ask if folks would be willing to rezone. So one thing that I was going to talk about later, but it's perfect timing. No, it like relates to what I was going to talk about later. One aspect that Jeff and I were talking about and thinking about the modules is that there's probably a need to do some community engagement somewhere in the modules 1 and 2 area. Once we get a better sense of what districts we might want to have and what their purposes might be, that would be a good time to go out and have some more community engagement about, well, this is how we're thinking about approaching this in the future. I could see that being a good time to just, hey, this is what we're approaching, not necessarily having a map that scares everybody, but maybe having conversations or some way of talking with folks about that or saying, this is what we're thinking if you're interested. We can talk more about that. I don't remember that discussion too much, but.
I.e. Institutional zones and anybody who wants to rezone into that.
So it seems like that might be a good time, because that would be like a gentle way to just say, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. What do you think? Do you have any interest? That might be a good time to start figuring that out. So you just teed right into community engagement discussion. And I was thinking that also would be the time if we wanted to talk about certain, I'll call them accessory uses for lack of a better word, but urban farming, chickens, accessory dwelling units have been topics that were brought up. So that would be a good time to bring up, like, here's what people are talking about, what do you think, before we dive into writing all the regulations for or against those topics. So that we're thinking about would be between modules 1 and 2, but we're still working out exactly the timing. I'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, module 3, that would cover chapters 3, 4, and 6. So 3 would be the general development standards. Sorry, I was just hesitating for a second. I should just have it in front of me so I don't misspeak. I was right. I all of a sudden got second guessing myself. 4 is subdivision standards and 6 is signage. We probably will have to talk about the zoning map again. We probably will have to talk about the zoning. We may have to every module. That's okay, because that's such a key part of this. But this is where we would talk about general development standards, parking, landscaping, screening. So these are basically things that aren't necessarily district related. That's why they're in a different spot. They kind of are overarching throughout the whole city, and they don't necessarily apply to specific districts. That's also where we would talk about subdivision requirements and subdivision design standards, and then signage, if there's any elements that we specifically need to address. And then the last module would look at chapters 1 and 5, so that's the introductory provisions, nonconformities, and procedures. And as I told staff, it's not that we're not going to work on 5 all the way along. I think that one but it's more of a technical, behind-the-scenes, work through it with staff over the following months to try and figure things out. But we really want to get the zoning and the performance standards and the design-related things tackled first. Because procedures are procedures, and a lot of them are regulated based on statute, so there's not a lot of room for interpretation or doing things different, so it's kind of a behind-the-scenes one that we work on throughout the next few months.
How identifiable are nonconformities in the beginning rather than at the end? It's probably easier to do it at the end or after you run into some.
Right. Part of this is you have to have provisions relating to how do you handle a nonconforming use, how do you handle a nonconforming structure. And we've had some discussion about where that fits, but it is nice to have it at the end. And also think about how do we write provisions that allow for continuation or allow for addressing them.
Because again, nonconformities can almost apply to a lot of different areas here.
Right. No, they have provisions for structures. Yes. From the identification would focus on where we're creating non-conforming uses, but the standards in here would deal with both uses and structures. And I've termed nonconformities so then it can cover both uses and structures, and I think we need to distinguish between the two because they have different implications and different issues with them.
So, and as a part that Rita had mentioned, as we are looking at our different zoning districts and where they might be placed or where would it be appropriate, we're also keeping in mind what is existing today. And if we are recommending potential changes to certain areas, we want to make sure that we're testing our code and what we're doing, that we aren't creating more nonconformities and more headaches for ourselves down the road. So while we're looking at these different areas, we're keeping that in mind, and then we're also, as stated in the end, building in opportunities for grandfathering in, because it has other implications. If you have a non-conforming structure, you can only replace 50% of the value, and there's a whole slew of rules that are tied to nonconformities that are not tied to your more specific. So we want to make sure that that is a very specific lens that we're looking through, especially when rezoning is
So next steps. We wanted to talk a little bit with you and get your input and thoughts. We have a potential schedule just kind of drafted with staff. And so there are some implications with it. Our goal right now is to see if we can get through the modules by mid-September. To do that, we need to kind of meet on a regular basis, and we're aiming for every 4 to 6 weeks is kind of our general aim, enough time for us to produce the work that we need and get through the analysis and the creation. We're also trying to work around holiday schedules and your meeting schedules and all kinds of schedules. So our thought, so when we had originally talked, I think we had some discussion when we first started about having a separate meeting or having this as part of meetings that already take place. So I think, if you can talk, you would be best able to talk about this part of it, about how but these are the dates that we're potentially have talked about.
Sure. So tonight would be a great example. We were able to power through a variety of public hearings and get general business done within the first 45 minutes of the meeting. However, it's likely that these modules are not going to take an hour. It may take 2 hours, it may take a little more. So when we initially were discussing this, we had talked about Tuesdays in general in the afternoons as an opportunity for plan commissioners to have. These meetings would be publicly noticed because we would have a quorum. They would be in addition to your regularly scheduled plan sub if you're on that committee, and plan commission if you're not. In general, we're shooting for the third Tuesday of the month. Depending on holidays and other schedules, it might end up actually having on the same night as Plan Sub and Common Council, which is the second Tuesday of the month. Again, you're heavily noticed in advance, especially for the ones coming up in the beginning. We're trying to space out so that we do have room to get in some more citizen engagement. We've already received questions from 2 different groups in the community that want to know where we're at. And my comment was, we're reviewing how wonderful our code is today. Come up in spring and we will be able to get immediate feedback. So there is interest in the community that are unsoliciting, coming and asking for code and what are you doing, what does it look like, I'm excited. So because of that, it's a little tighter in the beginning to allow for that feedback, but this is what we're looking at today. And then it also helps you plan your, spring and summer, early fall.
You'll issue this to us, right, Katie? Because I think this kind of was what we kind of all generally felt when we had the discussion initially, is that Tuesdays were kind of the target and,
Early afternoon, give everybody opportunities for lunch, and then if we spend a couple hours, then worst case, if it is on a subcommittee meeting night, there'll be breaks between this subcommittee and council.
Great. Any concerns? Does this seem like, it sounds like, kind of felt like this is what we had talked about? I saw a nodding of the heads of a few, so just figured I'd check. So if we follow the schedule, as you can see, we'll start with Module 1 in the beginning of April, and then we'll try and focus some community engagement in early May. And the intention would be when we talk with you in April, we'll have an idea of what that community engagement would look like, what we're suggesting we would cover, and then you can provide input on that and how we think we're going to address it. And that'll give us time, 2 to 3 weeks, to tell people about it and set up whatever we think is appropriate. And that's not to say I should clarify, there is additional community engagement planned for after we finish the modules. We just felt like last fall it was too early to really do much because we didn't know all of the issues, we didn't know what we wanted to focus on, so we wanted to reserve that time and effort to when we actually had things for people to react to. It's really hard to say, what do you like about the UDC to the general public? But if we have some ideas about, this is what we're thinking about doing, what do you think, to react, it'll probably be more fruitful for all of us. So that's the plan. So after we establish the meeting schedule, which we'll do shortly, Katie will keep you informed and just make sure that we can have a quorum for those meetings. We'll do any revisions that are needed to the draft UDC, the actual report, and issue a final report. And then we'll start working on Module 1, which is chapters 2 and 7, primarily focused on the zoning districts. So that's kind of our next steps.
I do like the idea of getting the community involved because there are things that happen now and then where residents are surprised that, hey, I didn't know this was going to be built in my area. So if we can refine it and make the citizenry know what to expect when they're in a certain area, that would be very helpful.
Yes. Okay, yes, Katie.
So, are we through with part A? So 10B, Mr. Mayor? Which is the Community Development Authority has also engaged with HKGI, as mentioned by Jeff, to do 2 redevelopment plans for areas in the city of Onalaska. One being downtown Onalaska, which has gotten a lot of feedback and interest in the last few months, and then also State Road 16. So the purpose of this discussion tonight is to, one, let the Plan Commission hear this first full draft of the plan. Almost all of you, I believe, were able to attend the public information meetings that we had in early January. So a lot of the information that came from those sessions, plus a variety of meetings that we met with stakeholders, property owners, interested persons throughout the course of the last 6 to 8 months. These are the summary statements. So the other lens for the Plan Commission to look through is that if the CDA and Common Council adopt these plans, the Plan Commission will be the one reviewing downtown PUDs, rezoning requests, and things of that nature. So this plan also talks about different ways to implement the plans, which will come under the purview of the Plan Commission. So we want to make sure the Plan Commission was well aware of these documents so that when development opportunities come forward, one hand has talked to the other hand and that we're both on the same page. So I'll let Jeff take it away and give us our overview of the redevelopment plan.
Great, thanks, Katie. So there's, as you saw in your packet, there's 2 redevelopment study plans, one for downtown and one for the State Route 16 corridor. And just as background, those study areas were laid out by the city and given to us. So I mean, we weren't determining what those study areas were. These are both draft plans. The CDA reviewed them a couple of weeks ago, gave us a lot of really good input. We're open to your input tonight. And then the plan is to go back to the CDA on the 13th to finalize, or hopefully for them to approve the plans, and then they would go to the Common Council after that to be officially approved. So I'm just going to run through downtown first, and then State Route 16 second. I'm not going to go page by page, but I'll just try to hit on some of the highlights. So, so the layout is each of the 2 studies has a project background area, then existing conditions, input that was received from key stakeholder meetings that were organized, and the community open house in January, the redevelopment framework, and the implementation strategy. So the background stuff, I think, hopefully it's helpful to anybody using the document, but I'm not going to go through that because you guys are part of that. You guys established the background for downtown. So if you have questions, we can talk about those questions. But The existing conditions, we looked at zoning, where it is today. We looked at the land use plan from the comp plan, or I'm sorry, that's current land use, so what's actually out there today. We looked at transportation, all modes, even the trains. Not popular downtown if you live down there, I guess, but we looked at all those. Parks, trails, and open spaces, a lot going on downtown in that regard, obviously. And then, just wanted to hit on redevelopment scoring, if you have a chance to look at that. The way that was looked at, and that shows up on the next page. So it was trying to get at a way to evaluate properties that have more potential for redevelopment versus some that have less. So the maps that you're seeing today, the things that are the most red or orange have higher redevelopment potential, and that criteria is based on that score on the right side of this page. It's going to change, so don't get confused, but the CDA had a feeling that green means go, so we're going to reverse the color. So the next time you see it, green will be the one that you'd be looking for, not red. So there's a market summary in here that's pretty interesting to get a sense of the downtown market. And there's takeaways related to residential versus commercial for downtown. Input, we got lots of input and tried to summarize that. Even thinking about the 2014 community survey had a lot of, obviously that had a lot of responses to it. So we looked at that, and that's really where the input, I would say, started, is that there was a lot of input in there about downtown and its potential. But then we had the stakeholder meetings in August and November last fall, and got a lot of input that way, and then the open house in January. So the framework, the meat of the downtown plan is the redevelopment framework. The way the way the plan or studies reviewing it is to think of downtown as different types of districts. So the red being the downtown core mixed-use district, the narrow band along the river being riverfront residential, the purple being what we're calling right now the Great River Road Business Corridor, and then again this is the study area that we were working on, so it doesn't include, it doesn't go all the way to the east, but that band of residential along the west side of 3rd Avenue, half a block off 35. Thinking about that as downtown mixed residential, because it is backing up to non-residential, so it has good capacity for being denser residential if there's redevelopment in that area. And then also the 2 blocks north of downtown, at the very top of this map, we call downtown mixed residential. So these are the 4 districts. This is a draft, and we're updating this right now, so I realize districts is misspelled on this page, which misspelling bugs me a lot, so we caught it. It'll be taken care of. But these are the 4 districts, and that's actually going to say design guidelines in the next version, so that really gets rid of the misspelling. But the idea is that for each of the districts, there's design guidelines related to land uses specific to that district, parking, driveways, and buildings design. And ideally, these design guidelines would be used when you're looking at development proposals down the road. And then there's 2 redevelopment scenarios in here. One's called targeted redevelopment scenario. It's meaning that it's targeted to properties or areas that we think have the most redevelopment potential. The obvious one that you're very aware of is the riverfront residential that's starting on the north end, right across from the Great River Landing. But in general, when I get further in the report, a lot of momentum around the two, very attractive open spaces in downtown now with Dash Park and the Great River Landing. So you see a lot of the targeted redevelopment in that area. And then a broader redevelopment scenario that looks out longer period where redevelopment might happen and showing what kinds of buildings and uses and how parking could be handled on those sites as well. And then there's transportation goals, long-term, looking at how Main Street could change over time to be nicer, looking at Irvin Street. As you know, Irvin Street's being looked at right now for reconstruction. Other local streets, the alleys, and then parking. Parking will continue to be an important thing downtown. The idea of an enhanced alley, so that alley between Highway 35 and 3rd Avenue becoming a desirable place not just to drive, but to walk and to bike through and be able to move around really easily in downtown, which we're calling a paseo, but meaning a nicer multi-use alley. That's the key thing there, but there's other things that are indicated on that diagram. Parks, trails, and open space, really focusing on trails and then building out the rest of the Great River Landing project, especially down by the waterfront. And trails, obviously the trails are there, and the trail would continue to come into downtown on Main Street and go down 3rd Avenue, but also creating on this diagram, you see that kind of thick green line, creating a downtown loop for people that live or just want to come downtown and bike short distances, a loop that would go from 3rd across to the river on Irvin, along the riverfront or next to the rail line, and then back on Elm to 3rd Avenue, but keeping the trail as it is today, as it goes from north to south as well. And then that column there on the right-hand side describes what the paseo could be like for that alley through the core of downtown. And then lastly is the implementation strategies or approach. And kind of the key things here are identifying who has a role and responsibilities in seeing this plan through. So it talks about business and property owners, the city of Onalaska in general, staff, both planning, zoning, and engineering departments, the CDA, of course, who's been shepherding this plan, the Plan Commission, as Katie described, how you would use it in the future, Common Council, and then the community at large. It also identifies the official plan and regulations that would need to change. So basically saying that to use this as an official tool to have it be adopted or approved by the CDA and the council, amending the comp plan, we're recommending for downtown that actually some of the mixed use area actually be guided for mixed density residential. So while mixed use is a great thing, we're recommending that the area along 3rd Avenue and along the riverfront be mixed residential areas, and that you don't have commercial going everywhere. It's we found in a lot of cities, you don't want commercial to be everywhere. It's better if it's more clustered and it's visible from major movement corridors. So obviously Highway 35 is important and will remain commercial, but then really trying to cluster it in the core rather than letting it just spread out too much. And then the third thing is amending the zoning. So we'll work with, this plan will work with the UDC rewrite project to rezone things appropriately. The design guidelines potentially getting linked officially to the zoning, the UDC, either through the PUD process, the downtown PUD overlay possibly. We'll have to work that out, but somehow getting those design guidelines linked to zoning, because as you might know, the downtown PUD is great and it's flexible, but doesn't really provide guidance for what you want. It just allows a lot of great things to happen, but I guess in theory it could allow a lot of bad things to happen too. So hopefully this will help get good things. And then what we're calling redevelopment of initiatives. I'm just going to quickly go through. It identifies the intent is to focus on the momentum around downtown's new open space assets. And it lays out the key things to think about in the downtown core. Really focus on building high quality development, building high quality public realm as well, like the Great River Landing, like the enhanced alleys, paseos, and so forth. Finalizing the update of the, listen to me, we're just getting started. Update the zoning code. And then broader redevelopment opportunities. An example is there's some possibility that the electric substation could move over time, and that would be an improvement to that area as there's more people living in that area. And then lastly, it identifies the public financing tools, so TIF, special assessments, the whole list there, resources, partners, all the way up to the state and federal level. So with that, I guess I want to see if there's questions about this plan, and then I'll go over the State Route 16 one as well. Any feedback or questions about that? If not, we'll keep going. Rita, do I just? All right. This one's different than downtown, but it'll be quicker because I'm not going to talk about, it has the same format of background, existing conditions, all that. So I'm not going to go through that. I'll just go right to the redevelopment framework quickly. Oops. Right there. Yep, here we go. So this corridor's trickier than downtown. These are major property owners. They're large properties. It's not obvious that redevelopment's going to happen there quickly or easily. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to look at redevelopment potential, short-term and long-term. What the redevelopment framework is showing for this area, and again, the study area was identified up front as these, what now looks like 3 areas. It looked like 1 area when we received it, I guess. But the way we're saying the city could view this corridor is to think about it as 3 kind of different districts. The first one being the East Gateway District, not just for this corridor, but for the city in a way. So, and in this corridor, that's the only area that the city is on both sides of State Route 16, so you can think about that differently because you can impact both sides of the road there. And then the other 2 kind of triangle areas are a little bit separated from each other, but they're going to be more impacted by what's happening across the roadway with the mall. And we think they have different potential for redevelopment long-term also. Not necessarily easier, but different. So then the study or plan goes through each of those districts, talks just generally about what the character of the East Gateway District could be. We're recommending that it would most likely continue to be all commercial or mostly commercial, in the format of either power centers or lifestyle centers, and we have some photos of examples of those types of areas. There is some potential for infill development in this area, and I'll get to that in a second. We have some examples of even, Walmart being reimagined. So there is potential for this area. It's just you have to figure out how to do that and how to work with those property owners to be interested in doing major changes over time. And then the other 2 districts we're envisioning changing in similar ways potentially. The term we're using is New Town Village for those. And the idea is, especially with the mall right across the roadway, what is being seen around the country with malls that are struggling is cities are studying them, re-guiding them. A lot of times they're re-guiding them for mixed use. Obviously you can't do that because it's in La Crosse, but as part of this project, we did meet with La Crosse staff twice to talk about, you know, where they are in that process or where they might be going with that. But, you know, if that did start to change and it, say for instance, there was residential coming into that area, which in some ways would be the most attractive place for residential to come into that corridor because it backs right up to the green space, that major conservation area in River Valley behind it. But if that started to happen, then definitely these two areas we feel like would have the potential to also do that. They're also the older, you know, relatively more outdated commercial buildings. So they're more likely to redevelop than the buildings to the east. So that's how those two are being guided, and there's examples in here of where this kind of thing has happened. And then the report goes through initiatives for what type of redevelopment could happen here. Talks about transportation, parks, trails, and open space. And then this diagram tries to illustrate what could happen. So you see, you know, we have some concepts for how buildings could change, especially in that area near Theater Road. Part of what's going on in this area is the considerations, the issues relating to roadways. The Theater, State Route 16 intersection obviously is difficult, and then PH and Theater Road as well. There's a general limitation on roadway connections through this area, so it's difficult from a public standpoint to figure out how do you improve that. So you see ideas for, could there be an underpass of 90 at Prawley Center Drive? So that's shown on here as a possibility. Could the private commercial road, east-west road between Theater Road and Prawley Center Drive over to 16, which obviously people are using that as a public road sometimes to get through that area when Theater Road's backing up. Could that be a public road over time? You know, those are big decisions that involve the city deciding that and then working with property owners and they affect buildings. So, I mean, the way we're looking at that is just ideas of how redevelopment could happen. Another big thing here is, and we'll address this with the UDC rewrite project, is if the parking requirements out here are substantially higher than they need to be, and those actually get reduced, we can look at what is that, how much land does that open up for these property owners to infill with smaller buildings, which has happened in this area already in some places. So we're showing that idea too. And then another idea is a backage road on the south side of 16, so behind where Old Country Buffet used to be. And then if La Crosse starts changing things, there could be a road potentially along that whole back side of the mall so that it wouldn't, movement through here wouldn't be totally reliant on 16 as the way to get through this area. So lots of concepts there, you know, difficult to implement quickly and seemingly more difficult than downtown just because, you know, it's not necessarily ripe for redevelopment today and such big investments in these properties. Whoops. And then there's the implementation strategies, similar to downtown. I wanted to talk about this one other exhibit. So basically, it's from a land use standpoint, the top map is the city's downtown, or I'm sorry, city's comp plan, future land use map. In the final plan that we're going to zoom into this so you can actually see this area much better. But what's recommended in this plan is that those two triangle areas across from the mall be re-guided for mixed use, and today they're guided for commercial. So guided for mixed use on the plan, and then ultimately, hopefully a mixed-use zoning district that the city would have. So that mixed use could happen there. It wouldn't have to happen there, but it would allow it to happen there if somebody wants to do that. And then the bottom diagram is trying to get at how do things move forward here? And so it's identifying that on that bottom one, the orange is showing that if the decision is made that long-term the city or the community would like that road to go under I-90 to provide another north-south option to Theater Road underneath the freeway. Really, for that to happen, it would involve working with the properties to the east of there especially. So if, the other way to look at it is if those properties started to redevelop and somebody was gonna put new buildings there, maybe the city should consider getting right-of-way there and really think about doing that roadway north-south there. Similarly, the other connection could be probably Center Drive to the east, to the west, to Theater Road, that green road, and thinking about, does that become a high priority over time? Or do the properties north of there have interest in redeveloping, or both, and those two things work together? And then lastly, the biggest issue probably is Theater Road, but if Theater Road in the yellow, if that's gonna change, or the properties next to it are gonna redevelop, trying to work together, the city with those property owners, and Wisconsin DOT, of course, with 16, to work on that area to improve movement through that area, so. Otherwise, I won't go through this, but it identifies the initiatives for this area similar to downtown. That's an overview. Any feedback or questions or discussion? All right.
Anybody have any questions? Okay. Thank you. Keep up the good work. The last piece we have is review and consideration of an invoice from HKGI for the UDC zoning ordinance rewrite project. Is there a motion?
Motion to pay invoice number 018-021-9 in the amount, if I'm reading this correctly, $7,272.30.
$747.50.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's right, $747.50. I was on the wrong task.
Second?
Okay, motion made by Commissioner Brightspecker, seconded by Commissioner Tempty to pay HKGI invoice in the amount of $747.50. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions? So moved.
Steve has a motion to make.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
I'll second.
There he goes.
Motion by the chair, seconded by Commissioner Not to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed will be shot at dawn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 So moved.
And why would you wait till dawn to shoot them?
Meeting ended at 9:09 PM.